The cruelest betrayal is the one that happens while everyone is applauding. Caleb Foster had replayed those words in his mind countless times over the years whenever he audited another inheritance dispute involving Alpha families and forgotten Omega rights. But he never imagined they would describe his own life before the night was over. The Grand Harbor Ballroom overlooking Boston Harbor shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as hundreds of influential guests gathered for the annual Harrington Trust charity auction. Wealthy investors, attorneys, politicians, and business leaders filled the elegant hall, their conversations blending with the sound of a live string quartet. Caleb adjusted the sleeve of his tailored navy suit and forced himself to smile beside his boyfriend, Mason Rourke. For nearly 3 years, they had built what looked like the perfect relationship. Mason was a respected Alpha attorney representing Harrington Trust, while Caleb had earned a reputation as one of the state's most meticulous Omega inheritance auditors. Together, they appeared to embody stability, but Caleb's thoughts remained fixed on the encrypted financial report saved inside the silver USB drive resting safely in his jacket pocket. After 6 months of reviewing inheritance records, he had uncovered millions of dollars quietly transferred from charitable Omega inheritance funds into shell companies hidden beneath layers of legal paperwork. The discrepancies were too precise to be accidental. Caleb planned to submit his findings to an independent review panel the following week, believing the evidence would finally expose a network exploiting vulnerable Omega families through outdated sponsorship laws. Mason had encouraged him to attend the gala first, insisting the evening would strengthen their professional reputation before the difficult legal battle ahead. Caleb believed him. As the charity auction reached its final presentation, the Master of Ceremonies invited Mason onto the stage to recognize his contributions to Harrington Trust. Caleb applauded with everyone else, proud despite the exhaustion that had followed weeks of non-stop investigation. Mason accepted the applause with effortless confidence before unexpectedly extending his hand toward a young Omega standing near the front row. Caleb recognized him immediately. Adrian Wells worked as Mason's legal assistant. Confusion flickered across Caleb's face as Adrian reluctantly stepped beside Mason. Without warning, Mason gently cupped Adrian's face and kissed him in front of the entire ballroom. Cameras flashed from every direction. Conversation stopped. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward Caleb almost instantly. Mason turned toward the audience with an expression so calm it felt rehearsed. "Sometimes," he announced smoothly, "life teaches us when two people are no longer compatible. Stress changes people. Professional pressure changes judgment. Caleb has become emotionally overwhelmed by his responsibilities, and I hope everyone respects my decision to move forward honestly." The words struck harder than the kiss itself. Caleb could barely hear the murmurs spreading through the ballroom. His heartbeat pounded inside his ears while reporters hurried to capture photographs of the stunned Omega standing alone beneath the chandeliers. Before Caleb could leave, one of the senior trustees quietly approached and requested the financial report he had been preparing. Caleb refused, explaining it remained independent work until officially submitted. Moments later, hotel security politely intercepted him near the exit. They informed him that representatives from Harrington Trust believed confidential organizational documents might be leaving the premises without authorization. Caleb realized with growing horror that Mason's public betrayal had never been about ending their relationship. It had been designed to undermine his credibility before anyone examined his investigation. If people believed an emotionally unstable Omega had prepared the report after suffering relationship problems, the findings themselves could easily be dismissed. Caleb stood perfectly still while guests watched from a distance, unsure whether to pity him or avoid becoming involved. Then another presence quietly entered the moment. A tall man wearing a perfectly tailored black suit descended the sweeping marble staircase overlooking the ballroom. A dark tattoo extended along the side of his neck beneath the crisp collar of his shirt, unmistakably marking him as Mafia. Conversations softened almost instantly. Roman DeLuca rarely attended public charity events, yet everyone in Boston recognized the leader of the DeLuca Consortium. He walked directly toward the growing confrontation without raising his voice or displaying the slightest urgency. His calm alone changed the atmosphere. Roman looked first at Caleb, then at the security officers, and finally at the trustee demanding the report. "Before anyone touches that evidence," he said evenly, This entire ballroom should remember there are surveillance cameras covering every entrance, every hallway, and every conversation taking place tonight. I suggest preserving every recording before anyone decides what happened. The hotel's legal compliance director, who had been quietly observing the confrontation from the edge of the ballroom, immediately reminded security that once a dispute involved potential evidence preservation, detaining a guest without lawful authority could expose the hotel to significant legal liability. Faced with that warning and aware that Roman had publicly called for surveillance preservation rather than interference, the trustee hesitated while the officers stepped back to await formal instructions. Roman never claimed authority over Caleb or instructed him what to do. Instead, he bent down, picked up the silver USB drive that had slipped unnoticed from Caleb's jacket during the confusion, and extended it toward him without crossing the final step between them. "I believe this belongs to you," Roman said. Caleb accepted the drive cautiously, uncertain whether gratitude or suspicion should come first. Every warning his mother had ever given him about the Mafia echoed inside his mind. Yet this dangerous alpha had shown him more respect in 1 minute than Mason had shown him all evening. Roman nodded toward a quieter side corridor leading away from the crowd. "You are free to leave," he said. "No one here has the legal authority to decide otherwise." Caleb followed the hallway without another word, still carrying the report that had suddenly become far more valuable than he understood. Behind him, the ballroom slowly returned to polite conversation, but the cameras never stopped recording. Outside, the cold harbor air helped steady his breathing until Roman quietly handed him a sealed envelope that had been delivered to the DeLuca table only minutes earlier. Caleb opened it expecting another legal notice. Instead, he found an unsigned marriage registration naming himself and Roman DeLuca as future spouses, prepared nearly 3 months before they had ever met. And in that instant he realized tonight's public betrayal had only been the opening move of a far larger plan. Caleb barely noticed the icy wind rolling across Boston Harbor as he stood outside the ballroom staring at the unsigned marriage registration. His own name appeared beside Roman DeLuca's in flawless legal formatting, complete with witness spaces, filing references, and a preparation date nearly 3 months earlier. The document looked authentic enough to fool anyone who examined it quickly, yet Caleb knew with absolute certainty he had never met Roman before tonight. "Someone intended for this to exist long before either of us knew about it," Caleb said quietly. Roman nodded without attempting to take the document back. "It was delivered anonymously to my table less than 5 minutes before I walked toward the ballroom entrance. I assumed it was another intimidation tactic until I saw your name." Caleb looked up sharply. "You are telling me someone forged a marriage record connecting an Omega inheritance auditor to a Mafia Alpha before destroying my reputation in public?" Roman answered with complete honesty. "That is exactly what I am telling you." Before Caleb could ask another question, his phone rang. Nora Bennett spoke immediately after he answered. She had already seen photographs from the charity gala spreading across local news websites. Worse still, several legal blogs were repeating Mason's claim that Caleb's emotional instability had compromised months of inheritance audits. Nora urged Caleb to meet her at her law office before sunrise because the State Ethics Commission could suspend his auditing certification if the allegations gained enough attention. Caleb and Roman arrived separately less than an hour later. Nora spread copies of the forged marriage registration across the conference table beside public records she had retrieved from the county database. After carefully comparing every document, she confirmed that the registration had never been officially filed, but its formatting matched authentic state templates perfectly. "This was never intended to become a legal marriage," Nora explained. "It was designed to become evidence. If someone had quietly submitted this after your report became public, they could accuse you of secretly collaborating with Roman DeLuca while investigating financial misconduct involving organizations connected to his business interests." Caleb slowly realized the trap. Even if the marriage had never happened, the appearance of undisclosed ties between himself and a Mafia Alpha would destroy the credibility of every conclusion inside his investigation. Roman quietly placed another folder on the table. Inside were property records showing Harrington Trust had recently attempted to purchase several waterfront warehouses owned by companies connected to the DeLuca consortium. "My family refused to sell," Roman explained. Those properties control transportation routes worth millions of dollars. Whoever is behind this is attacking both of us from different directions. Nora continued examining historical ownership records until another disturbing pattern emerged. Many disputed properties had originally belonged to Omega families who lost inheritance rights under outdated Alpha sponsorship laws decades earlier. Caleb stared at one familiar address before his breathing slowed. The location belonged to the small bookstore his mother still operated on the edge of Boston. Roman remained silent while Caleb absorbed the discovery. Finally, Caleb looked toward him. "Why should I believe anything you say? Everything I was taught about mafia families says this could be another manipulation." Roman accepted the question without offense. "You should not believe me because of my name. You should believe whatever you can verify." He opened a leather portfolio and slid a thick legal contract across the table. Caleb expected threats. Instead, he found a proposed marriage agreement unlike anything he had imagined. Every major clause protected the Omega rather than the Alpha. Caleb would retain complete ownership of his personal property, continue practicing his profession independently, maintain separate financial accounts, refuse physical contact at any time, choose his own residence if desired, and end the marriage without requiring Roman's approval. Even decisions involving public appearances required written consent from both spouses. Caleb read every page twice before speaking. "You already signed all of this." Roman nodded. "Hours before I came here." Nora carefully reviewed every clause before quietly confirming there were no hidden provisions granting Roman control over Caleb's assets, career, or legal rights. The room fell silent until Diane Foster arrived after receiving Nora's urgent message. Caleb handed his mother the warehouse records connected to her bookstore. Diane closed her eyes for several long moments before revealing a truth she had hidden for years. When Caleb was a child, Harrington Trust had stripped away most of her inheritance after ruling that an Omega widow without Alpha sponsorship represented an unacceptable financial risk. She had rebuilt her life through decades of hard work, never realizing the same organization was now targeting her son. Caleb slowly closed the contract before meeting Roman's steady gaze. "If I agree to this marriage, it will not be because I need another Alpha to rescue me." Roman answered immediately. "Then add whatever conditions you need until it becomes your decision instead of mine." Caleb picked up a red pen, crossed out 3 clauses, added his own requirement that every major legal decision must carry both of their signatures, and beneath the final page wrote one sentence that neither lawyer expected. "This marriage will exist only if equality remains stronger than fear." Roman signed without changing a single word, unaware that the filing clerk processing their documents the following morning would unknowingly activate an old DeLuca family succession clause naming Caleb as joint legal custodian of a confidential archive that generations of powerful people had desperately tried to keep hidden. 3 days after the courthouse quietly recorded their marriage certificate, Caleb Foster found himself standing before the iron gates of the DeLuca estate, wondering how a decision made to protect the truth had completely changed the direction of his life. The sprawling property overlooked the Atlantic from a rocky hillside north of Boston, elegant rather than extravagant, with carefully maintained gardens replacing the intimidating fortress he had imagined. Roman greeted him at the entrance without ceremony. There were no photographers, no servants lined up to welcome a new spouse, and no attempt to make Caleb feel as though he had surrendered his independence. Roman simply handed him a small ring of keys. One opened the private guest residence beside the main house, another opened the library, and the third opened the secure archive that had unexpectedly become Caleb's legal responsibility under an old DeLuca family succession clause triggered by their marriage. "You decide where you stay," Roman said calmly. "Nothing here belongs to you unless you choose to accept it." Caleb accepted the keys, but kept his expression guarded. Trust could not appear overnight simply because someone respected boundaries. Inside the archive building, rows of climate-controlled cabinets stretched across a room nearly the size of a basketball court. Anthony DeLuca, Roman's beta cousin and financial advisor, waited beside several open boxes filled with decades of shipping records, corporate agreements, and property ledgers. Anthony's polite greeting carried obvious caution. He did not object to Caleb's presence, but he clearly questioned whether an outsider should be allowed near confidential family records. Caleb ignored the tension and immediately focused on the files. Within an hour, he recognized something remarkable. Several shipping companies repeatedly appeared inside Roman's business records using the same identification codes hidden throughout the financial report Caleb had prepared for Harrington. Trust. At first glance, the evidence suggested the DeLuca Consortium had participated in the movement of stolen inheritance assets. But after tracing hundreds of transactions one by one, Caleb reached a different conclusion. Every suspicious shipment entered the DeLuca transportation network already disguised by shell companies before leaving through unrelated commercial routes. The DeLuca family had unknowingly become the middle section of a much larger operation rather than its architect. Someone with access to both corporate systems had intentionally buried illegal transfers inside ordinary commercial traffic. Roman listened carefully while Caleb explained the pattern without interrupting. "So my family has been used as camouflage," Roman concluded quietly. Caleb nodded. "And whoever designed this expected investigators to stop the moment they found your company name." Anthony folded his arms. "Or perhaps someone inside this room is creating a convenient explanation." Caleb met his stare without anger. "You have every reason to question me. I would probably do the same." Later that afternoon, another problem emerged. One of the original shipping manifests Caleb had examined earlier suddenly disappeared from the archive database. Anthony immediately suspected Caleb had copied or removed the file. Several senior DeLuca advisors demanded that Roman suspend Caleb's archive access until an internal investigation finished. Roman surprised everyone by refusing. "No accusation becomes truth simply because it is repeated," he said evenly. "We investigate facts, not assumptions." Caleb appreciated the confidence, but he also understood that Roman had placed his own credibility at risk. Instead of defending himself emotionally, Caleb requested complete access to the digital audit logs. After several hours of reviewing encrypted system records, he discovered that the missing document had never been deleted. It had been reassigned through an administrator account belonging to a former archive director who had died almost 8 years earlier. Someone was secretly operating under a dead employee's credentials to move sensitive records without attracting attention. That discovery changed everything. The missing file was not evidence against Caleb. It was proof that an unseen insider still controlled part of the DeLuca record system. As evening settled over the estate, Caleb continued working until exhaustion and emotional strain triggered an overwhelming surge of omega pheromones brought on by days of relentless stress. Embarrassed, he stepped into a private reading room and closed the door behind him. He expected Roman to enter immediately, as many powerful alphas might have done under the excuse of offering protection. Instead, Roman remained outside. Through the closed door, his calm voice carried only one question. "Would you prefer water, a physician, or complete privacy?" Caleb closed his eyes. No alpha had ever asked him what he wanted during a vulnerable moment. After several seconds, he answered quietly, "Stay nearby, but do not come in yet." Roman respected the request without hesitation. Nearly 20 minutes later, Caleb opened the door himself. Roman handed him a glass of cold water, but did not touch him. The simple gesture dissolved another layer of distrust that Caleb had carried since childhood. That night, they shared a quiet dinner in the smaller kitchen rather than the formal dining room. Between ordinary conversation about work, Roman admitted that his own mother had once lost her independence because his father believed protection justified control. Watching that happen had shaped every promise Roman now made to Caleb. For the first time since the disastrous charity gala, Caleb allowed himself to believe that this unusual marriage might become something more than a legal strategy. But before either man could explore that possibility, the overnight security report arrived with disturbing news. Surveillance cameras recorded Adrian Wells entering the archive building just 40 minutes before the missing shipping manifest was secretly reassigned, raising a question that threatened to unravel every fragile step of trust they had built together. The surveillance footage changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Caleb watched the recording several times inside the archive security office, carefully, observing Adrian Wells as he entered the building late in the evening. Instead of moving confidently like someone stealing information, Adrian repeatedly looked over his shoulder, hesitated outside the secure records room, and appeared visibly nervous before disappearing from the camera's view for less than 4 minutes. When the footage ended, Anthony crossed his arms. He was inside the archive just before the file disappeared. That cannot be a coincidence. Caleb remained focused on the screen. No, but fear is not the expression of someone carrying out a confident plan. Roman looked toward Caleb instead of answering Anthony. You think he was sent here? Caleb nodded. Or forced. Roman immediately arranged a meeting but refused to bring Adrian to the estate against his will. Instead, he reserved a private conference room inside a downtown mediation center monitored by attorneys and security staff, ensuring every participant entered voluntarily. When Adrian arrived the following afternoon, exhaustion was written across his face. He looked nothing like the confident Omega who had stood beside Mason at the charity gala. Caleb spoke first. I'm not asking whether you entered the archive. I already know you did. I want to know why. Adrian lowered his eyes before quietly answering. Because Mason ordered me to. The room fell silent. Adrian explained that months earlier his father had signed an Alpha sponsorship agreement with Harrington Trust after medical bills nearly destroyed their family finances. The contract gave the trust extraordinary influence over their housing assistance and insurance coverage. When Mason demanded that Adrian participate in the public kiss at the charity gala, refusing was never presented as a real option. Later, Mason instructed him to retrieve a financial ledger from the DeLuca archive. Adrian admitted he entered the building carrying copied access credentials supplied by someone inside the DeLuca organization, but when he opened the records cabinet, he realized the ledger contained evidence proving that hundreds of Omega inheritance accounts had been systematically undervalued before being transferred into shell corporations. Controlled by Sebastian Crow. Instead of destroying the ledger, Adrian secretly returned it to the archive after making an encrypted copy. I could not keep helping them after I saw what they were doing, Adrian whispered. Caleb believed him immediately because the timeline finally explained the missing document. Someone else had used the administrator account after Adrian left, hoping suspicion would remain focused on the frightened Omega. Before Adrian could sign a formal witness statement, news alerts suddenly appeared across every phone in the conference room. A popular media outlet had published photographs showing Caleb meeting privately with Adrian. Headlines immediately accused Caleb of secretly maintaining a relationship with the same Omega who had appeared beside Mason during the charity gala. Social media exploded with speculation that the recent marriage inside the DeLuca family had already collapsed. Reporters gathered outside the mediation center before anyone could leave. Anthony quietly muttered that the scandal would damage Roman's standing inside the DeLuca family council. Several senior advisors called within minutes, urging Roman to publicly distance himself from Caleb until the controversy passed. Roman listened without interrupting before ending every call with the same calm response. My husband has the freedom to speak with any witness, colleague, or friend he chooses. Marriage does not erase personal choice. Standing before reporters outside the building, Roman refused every question inviting him to criticize Caleb. Instead, he explained that consent, trust, and independent decision-making remained the foundation of their marriage. He made it clear that no Alpha authority would ever be used to limit Caleb's movements or relationships. The statement surprised both the media and the DeLuca family council. Inside the waiting room, Caleb watched the live broadcast in disbelief. Roman could have protected his public image with one carefully worded denial, yet he willingly accepted criticism rather than treat Caleb as property. When Roman returned, neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Caleb looked directly into his eyes. You knew. Defending my right to meet Adrian would create problems for you. Roman gave a quiet smile. Respect that disappears during difficult moments was never respect to begin with. Something shifted inside Caleb at that instant. The marriage that had started as a strategic agreement no longer felt entirely artificial. Trust had begun replacing caution one decision at a time. But before either of them could process that realization, Caleb's phone vibrated with a new message from an unknown number. Attached was an audio recording labeled with Roman's name and a single sentence beneath it that made Caleb's heart sink. Listen carefully before you decide whether your husband is truly different from every other Alpha you have ever known. Caleb stared at the anonymous audio file for several long seconds before pressing play. Roman's unmistakable voice filled the quiet room. If this marriage succeeds, Caleb will remain where I can protect him and control every threat surrounding him. The recording ended abruptly. No explanation. No additional context. Every fear Caleb had struggled to overcome returned at once. He slipped his phone into his pocket and walked directly to Roman instead of silently believing the recording. "I need you to listen to something," he said. Roman accepted the phone without hesitation. As the recording finished, he closed his eyes briefly before looking back at Caleb. "I said something similar," he admitted. "But not this sentence." Caleb frowned. "You recognize it?" Roman nodded. "The meeting happened several weeks before we married. My family counsel wanted me to bring you under permanent Alpha protection if circumstances forced us into an alliance. I refused. I said I wanted to protect you without controlling you." Someone removed one word, and that one edit changed the entire meaning. Caleb wanted to believe him, yet another question weighed even more heavily on his mind. "Why did you never tell me your family proposed making me a dependent spouse?" Roman remained silent for several moments before answering honestly. "Because I rejected the proposal immediately. I believe there was no reason to burden you with a threat that no longer existed." Caleb slowly shook his head. "You decided what information I deserved to know. That is still making a choice for me." Roman did not defend himself. "You are right." The simple admission carried far more weight than any excuse could have offered. "I thought I was protecting you from unnecessary fear. Instead, I repeated the same mistake I watched my father make with my mother. I chose silence instead of trust." Caleb looked toward the large windows overlooking the harbor. "I do not know if I can rebuild confidence overnight." Roman answered quietly. "I am not asking you to." They agreed that evening to continue working together on the investigation while living separately for a time. Caleb returned to the small guest residence on the edge of the estate while Roman remained inside the main house. The emotional distance hurt both of them, but neither wanted convenience to replace honesty. During the following days, Caleb buried himself in financial records while Nora continued analyzing the suspicious audio file. Advanced sound comparison confirmed that the spoken words had been digitally altered, but identifying the editor required finding the original recording. Meanwhile, Anthony reviewed visitor logs from an exclusive Alpha business club where Roman occasionally attended strategy meetings. One membership name immediately caught his attention. Vincent DeLuca, Roman's uncle and one of the senior voices inside the family council, had hosted the very meeting where the original conversation took place. Anthony quietly obtained attendance records and discovered Mason had entered the club as Vincent's invited guest on the same evening. The pieces began fitting together. Mason could never have accessed the recording alone. Someone inside the DeLuca family had supplied both the original audio and the opportunity to manipulate it. Caleb and Roman met again inside the archive library to compare timelines. This time there were no hidden folders, no private assumptions, and no information withheld. Roman unlocked every confidential cabinet connected to the family council and handed Caleb unrestricted access. "From today forward," Roman said, "there will be no secrets kept in the name of protecting you. If knowing the truth ever causes you to leave, that choice will still belong to you." Caleb looked at the open files spread across the long wooden table. He realized Roman was risking years of family tradition by exposing internal records to him without reservation. Although the hurt had not disappeared, respect quietly began replacing disappointment. Their investigation uncovered another disturbing discovery. Financial transfers connected Vincent to shell corporations operating beside Harrington Trust only weeks before the forged marriage registration had been created. The conspiracy was no longer limited to Sebastian Crow and Mason. Someone inside the DeLuca family had been helping build the trap from the beginning. As evening settled over the estate once again, another urgent phone call interrupted their work. Diane's voice trembled as she explained that legal representatives from Harrington Trust had delivered formal notice claiming ownership rights over the bookstore property through an old Alpha sponsorship agreement signed decades earlier. Unless the dispute was resolved, she could lose the bookstore within 30 days, forcing Caleb to choose between protecting his family or continuing the investigation that had already changed every part of his life. The notice from Harrington Trust arrived in a thick legal envelope, but its true weight rested on decades of injustice rather than the few sheets of paper inside. Caleb sat across from his mother inside the familiar bookstore where every shelf, every reading chair, and every handwritten recommendation card represented years of patient work. Diane carefully folded the notice before placing it beside an old family photograph. "I hoped this day would never come," she said quietly. She explained that after Caleb's father died, an outdated Alpha sponsorship agreement had allowed Harrington Trust to classify her as a financially vulnerable Omega. Although she had eventually repurchased the bookstore through years of sacrifice, the trust had quietly preserved a legal claim hidden inside complicated property records. Sebastian Crow was now using that forgotten clause to pressure Caleb into abandoning the inheritance investigation. If Caleb withdrew his report, the trust hinted the ownership dispute might simply disappear. Caleb lowered his eyes. "Maybe I should step away from the case." Diane immediately shook her head. "If you surrender now, another family will receive the same letter someday. I did not spend half my life rebuilding this place, so my son would learn that fear wins." Roman arrived a short time later after Nora called with the latest developments. He listened carefully while Caleb explained the situation. Without hesitation, Roman offered to purchase every outstanding claim against the bookstore through companies unconnected to the DeLuca family. Caleb appreciated the kindness, but gently refused. If an Alpha solves this with money, then the law never changes. Someone else will still lose everything tomorrow. Roman accepted the answer without argument. "Then we fight the law itself." Nora spent the following 48 hours researching the original sponsorship agreement. Hidden inside archived court records, she discovered something extraordinary. The contract required a voluntary signature from the sponsored Omega, yet the surviving copy contained only a witness certification and no signature from Diane herself. That omission could invalidate the entire agreement, but only if they located the original paper document stored inside a private records facility owned by companies connected to Vincent DeLuca. Rather than forcing entry or relying on family influence, Roman insisted they obtain a lawful court order authorizing inspection of the archive. The request required careful preparation, sworn affidavits, and judicial approval, delaying the search by several anxious days. During that time, Caleb noticed another change. Roman never attempted to rush the process, even though every delay increased political pressure from his own family council. The morning the inspection order was finally approved, Caleb, Roman, Nora, Anthony, and court representatives entered the secure storage facility together. Endless shelves filled with sealed document boxes stretched through the climate-controlled warehouse. Hours passed before Caleb located the file number matching Diane's sponsorship agreement. Inside the box rested the original contract exactly as Nora predicted. The signature line reserved for Diane remained completely blank. Before the evidence could be cataloged, warehouse employees informed the inspection team that another shipment had been scheduled for immediate transfer out of state under authorization from Vincent. Court officers quickly halted the removal while verifying the paperwork. Among the boxes waiting for shipment, Caleb discovered additional records involving hundreds of Omega families whose inheritance rights had been quietly redirected through nearly identical sponsorship agreements. At that moment, Adrian arrived carrying a laptop and several encrypted email archives. He revealed that before leaving Mason's office, he had secretly preserved correspondence proving Sebastian instructed employees to relocate or destroy historical sponsorship files before investigators could examine them. The emails confirmed the missing records were never accidental. They had been systematically targeted for years. Roman could have resolved the confrontation by invoking the authority many still associated with the DeLuca name. Yet he deliberately stepped aside and handed every recovered document directly to the court officers overseeing the inspection. "Evidence belongs inside the justice system," he said calmly, "not inside my family vault." Caleb watched the exchange with quiet admiration. The powerful Mafia Alpha standing beside him had chosen patience over influence and transparency over control. As the inspection concluded and the evidence was officially sealed, Caleb instinctively reached for Roman's hand outside the warehouse. This time there was no hesitation. He held it openly before Nora, Anthony, and his mother, not because a marriage certificate required the gesture, but because trust had finally begun replacing caution. Before anyone could celebrate, however, investigators reviewing the newly recovered shipment uncovered records identifying more than 400 Omega families affected by the same inheritance scheme. The scale of the conspiracy transformed single property dispute into a case capable of reshaping inheritance law across the entire state, and the final public hearing was scheduled to begin in less than 48 hours. With less than 48 hours remaining before the public hearing, every decision suddenly carried consequences far beyond Caleb Foster and Roman DeLuca. The recovered records had already revealed more than 400 Omega families whose inheritances had been quietly diverted through manipulated sponsorship agreements. Yet Nora discovered a new legal problem that threatened to destroy the entire case before it reached the courtroom. While organizing the evidence, she realized that several shipping ledgers originally copied from the DeLuca archive had technically been accessed before the court issued its inspection order. Even though Caleb had never altered the documents and their contents appeared authentic, using them directly could allow Sebastian Crow's attorneys to argue that the evidence had been obtained improperly. If the judge accepted that argument, months of investigation might disappear in a single ruling. Anthony reluctantly suggested keeping the source confidential to preserve the larger case. Roman rejected the idea immediately. If we hide the truth now, then every victory afterward will stand on the same kind of deception we have been fighting from the beginning. Caleb understood Roman was placing principle above convenience, but that choice also meant they needed another way to prove every financial transfer. Their attention turned toward Adrian Wells. As Mason's former legal assistant, Adrian had personally handled many internal communications and could authenticate the financial records through sworn testimony. The problem was painfully obvious. Once Adrian publicly testified against Harrington Trust, the sponsorship agreement controlling his family would almost certainly collapse, leaving his parents without housing assistance while the legal battle continued. Caleb refused to pressure him. Instead, he contacted every Omega family that had already agreed to join the class action lawsuit. Within 24 hours, dozens of families, independent businesses, and community organizations pledged emergency financial support to create a witness protection and housing fund that would help anyone facing retaliation for telling the truth. When Caleb explained the plan to Adrian, the younger Omega sat silently for several moments before tears filled his eyes. For the first time, Adrian whispered, "Someone asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I owed." He agreed to testify, not because he had been cornered, but because he finally had the freedom to choose. That evening, after another exhausting day preparing witness statements and legal exhibits, Caleb stepped onto the rooftop terrace overlooking the Boston skyline. Roman was already there, leaning quietly against the railing as city lights reflected across the harbor. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable rather than uncertain. Finally, Roman turned toward him. "When we signed our marriage agreement, I believe 12 months would be enough time to finish this investigation and quietly end our partnership." Caleb listened without interrupting. Roman continued with complete honesty. "I no longer want that future. Somewhere between the courthouse, the archive, and every difficult conversation we survived together, I fell in love with you." Caleb's heart raced, but Roman raised one hand before he could answer. "You do not owe me a response tonight. I promised your choices would always belong to you, and I will not break that promise now." Caleb slowly stepped closer until only a few inches separated them. "Then I will answer honestly," he said. "I love you too, but I do not want our future decided while this case still controls every part of our lives. When all of this is over, I want to choose you because I am completely free, not because danger pushed us together." Roman smiled with quiet understanding. "Then I will wait." They rested their foreheads together beneath the cool evening sky without rushing the moment any further. Their relationship had grown from suspicion into trust, then into genuine love, one deliberate decision at a time. The peaceful moment ended when Caleb received an unexpected call requesting a private meeting. Mason Rourke claimed he was prepared to surrender evidence exposing Sebastian Crow's entire operation if Caleb would arrange immunity from prosecution in return. Caleb listened carefully before giving a calm answer. "If you want to tell the truth, you can tell it in open court like everyone else. Justice cannot be negotiated behind closed doors." Mason ended the call without another word. As dawn approached on the morning before the hearing, Nora arrived with alarming news. Adrian had disappeared from the secure location prepared for witnesses, leaving behind only his phone and a single message indicating he had gone somewhere willingly. Whatever waited ahead would determine not only the outcome of the trial, but the future Caleb and Roman hoped to build together. The message Adrian left behind looked frightening at first, but its final line changed everything. He had not been taken. He had willingly entered a protected witness program after receiving credible information that Sebastian Crowe intended to pressure him into withdrawing his testimony before the public hearing. The secure location had been arranged through federal investigators rather than the local authorities, which explained why even Nora had not been informed. Relief spread through the entire legal team, but there was no time to celebrate. The hearing would begin within hours, and every witness needed to be prepared for careful questioning. The courthouse overflowed with reporters, attorneys, and families who had traveled across Massachusetts hoping someone would finally expose the inheritance system that had quietly damaged their lives for decades. Caleb walked through the front entrance beside Roman, not as an Omega hiding behind a powerful Alpha, but as an independent professional carrying years of financial analysis supported by evidence gathered through lawful investigation. Diane smiled proudly from the gallery, while dozens of Omega families filled every available seat behind her. When the hearing opened, Nora presented a detailed timeline showing how Harrington Trust had repeatedly undervalued Omega inheritance assets before transferring them through shell corporations. Caleb then explained the accounting methods and language everyone inside the courtroom could understand, carefully connecting every transaction to authentic bank records, property filings, and shipping documentation independently verified after the court approved the archive inspection. Instead of relying on disputed records alone, each conclusion was supported by multiple lawful sources collected over many months. Diane testified next, describing how outdated Alpha sponsorship laws had stripped her of financial security after her husband's death and forced her to rebuild her bookstore almost from nothing. Her calm testimony transformed complicated legal arguments into the story of a real family that had endured the consequences of an unfair system. Then the courtroom doors opened once more. Adrian entered under official witness protection accompanied by federal officers. He spoke clearly despite obvious emotion, explaining how Mason Rourke had instructed him to participate in the public kiss during the charity gala, how he had been pressured to retrieve records from the DeLuca archive, and how Sebastian Crowe's organization manipulated vulnerable Omega families through fear, financial dependence, and carefully disguised legal agreements. Adrian also confirmed that he had secretly returned the financial ledger because he could no longer participate in the deception. Mason initially denied every accusation. Nora responded by presenting authenticated electronic correspondence, visitor records from the Alpha Business Club, surveillance footage from the archive, and financial transfers connecting Mason directly to Sebastian and indirectly to Vincent DeLuca. Faced with overwhelming evidence assembled piece by piece rather than through any single dramatic revelation, Mason finally admitted his role in helping destroy Caleb's professional reputation and conceal the inheritance scheme. He accepted responsibility for his actions while confirming that Sebastian had directed the broader operation. Vincent attempted one final defense by claiming Roman had manipulated the entire investigation to increase the DeLuca family's influence over disputed assets. Instead of arguing, emotionally, Roman calmly presented signed amendments removing every remaining family rule that granted an Alpha spouse automatic authority over an Omega's finances or legal decisions. He voluntarily surrendered those privileges before the court, proving his marriage had never depended upon unequal power. The judges recessed to review the testimony while investigators formally announced criminal fraud charges against Sebastian and additional financial investigations involving companies connected to Vincent. Harrington Trust was placed under independent supervision while auditors began the lengthy process of reviewing hundreds of disputed inheritance files. No one promised immediate justice because everyone understood that restoring decades of lost property would require months of careful legal work. Outside the courthouse, the waiting crowd applauded not because every problem had been solved, but because meaningful change had finally begun. Reporters surrounded Caleb and Roman as they descended the courthouse steps together. Without hesitation, Caleb reached for Roman's hand before gently kissing him in full public view. It was not a gesture of revenge against Mason or a performance for the cameras. It was a quiet declaration that every important choice in his life now belonged to him alone. Roman smiled, neither surprised nor demanding anything more than the moment Caleb freely offered. As photographers captured an image entirely different from the painful photographs taken at the charity gala months earlier, another envelope quietly arrived among the day's official documents. Inside rested the final paperwork confirming that the 12-month marriage agreement would expire exactly 1 year from its signing date, accompanied by divorce papers already bearing Roman DeLuca's signature. 1 year later, the courtroom headlines had faded, but the lives changed by those decisions continued moving forward every single day. The independent review ordered after the public hearing had already returned homes, businesses, and financial compensation to hundreds of Omega families whose inheritances had been diverted through manipulated sponsorship agreements. The process remained ongoing because rebuilding trust required far more than a single legal victory. Yet for the first time, many families believed the system could become fair instead of simply accepting that it never would. Diane Foster's bookstore had become more than a neighborhood shop filled with shelves of well-loved books. A renovated community room now hosted weekly legal education seminars where Omega families learned about inheritance rights, financial planning, and recent changes to state regulations. Watching parents and young adults leave with information instead of fear reminded Diane every day that refusing to surrender the bookstore had been the right choice. Adrian Wells accepted a full-time position with the nonprofit witness support organization created after the case concluded. Rather than hiding from the past, he dedicated himself to helping other witnesses safely navigate complicated legal proceedings without feeling isolated or powerless. Anthony DeLuca spent the year reorganizing every legitimate DeLuca business under stricter independent oversight, proving that transparency strengthened the family's future far more effectively than secrecy ever had. Roman remained the head of the DeLuca consortium, but the family council itself had changed. Representatives from Alpha, Beta, and Omega communities now held equal voting authority on major governance decisions, ending traditions that had concentrated power in the hands of only a few influential leaders. Caleb established his own independent forensic auditing firm specializing in inheritance accountability and nonprofit financial compliance. Clients sought him not because he had married a powerful alpha, but because he had earned a reputation for protecting truth even when doing so threatened his own career. Financially secure and professionally respected, Caleb no longer depended on anyone else to define his future. Exactly 12 months after they signed their original marriage agreement, Roman quietly placed a familiar envelope on the table inside his office. The divorce papers already carried his signature exactly as promised. "I gave you my word," Roman said gently. "You would always be free to leave without losing your work, your property, your independence, or your dignity." Caleb looked at the papers for a long moment before signing them himself. Neither of them spoke while the final legal documents were completed. It hurt both of them, yet neither attempted to change the other's decision. Their first marriage had fulfilled its purpose exactly as intended. Several days later, Roman received an invitation asking him to visit Diane's bookstore after closing. Expecting nothing more than a quiet dinner, he arrived to find the lights glowing warmly behind the front windows. Inside, friends, family members, Nora, Anthony, Adrian, and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the investigation stood smiling among shelves decorated with white flowers and photographs celebrating restored families. Caleb walked toward Roman carrying a small velvet box. "Our first marriage was born because danger left us with almost no choices," Caleb said softly. "It protected us, but it also reminded me every day how we met. I wanted to close that chapter before opening a new one." He opened the box to reveal a simple wedding band. "Today I am not standing here as an Omega searching for protection. I am standing here as a man who already has his own career, his own home, his own voice, and complete freedom to choose the person he wants beside him. Roman DeLuca, will you marry me again? This time without contracts based on fear, without unequal privileges, and without any rule placing one of us above the other?" Roman's eyes filled with emotion as he removed the old family signet ring that had once represented generations of inherited authority. He placed it carefully into his pocket before accepting the new band. "Yes," he answered with quiet certainty. "This time we build everything together." Surrounded by the people who had walked beside them through every setback and every hard-earned victory, Caleb and Roman exchanged vows founded entirely on mutual respect, equal choice, and freely given love. As warm light filled the bookstore that had once symbolized loss, but now represented hope, Caleb realized the greatest victory had never been defeating those who tried to control his future. The greatest victory was discovering that real love never demanded surrender. It simply waited until both hearts could choose each other without fear. If you were in their place, what choice would you have made? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy Alpha and Omega stories filled with love, sacrifice, heartbreak, and unforgettable second chances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next journey.